Hey guys, welcome to the podcast. Excited, very excited for this topic. Not one that I haven't covered before, but a very popular topic. We're going to talk about social media listening evolved. So, guys, I feel like every time we talk about this, there's more and more interest, more and more questions, which is why I wanted to bring these two special guests along here so that we can talk about it. So before we, go too far ahead, why don't you guys introduce yourselves? So we have Connor and Kevin. Connor, let's start with you. Quick intro.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Connor McLadrigan, and currently a senior medical science liaison at Takeda Oncology and pharmacist by training. Quick disclaimer, views and opinions today are my own and not reflective of my employer. Thank you so much, Tom, for having us.
Yeah, man, I'm excited. And Kevin.
Yeah, Kevin Peterson. I'm a senior MSL at Gilead, also a pharmacist. So we're going to get the pharmacist opinion today. And
Yep.
again, I just want to emphasize these are my opinions. So no other bias in here but my own.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, and you guys were actually two people that came to me through our my dear friends and our sponsor for today's episodes, which is Medical Watch. So, guys, you have heard me talk about Medical Watch before on this show. If you have not signed up and tried it, like what are you waiting for? It's time. Sign up is free. You go to medical.watch and you can sign up for free. And basically, Medical Watch helps you understand what HCPs are saying about your products and the disease states that you specialize in on social media. So why wouldn't you do it? So you guys do that. We're going to talk about that stuff right now because this is going to be almost like a continuation from some of the other discussions that we've had on social media listening. But let's start with what I like to do is start with Connor and go kind of basic and just talk about what is social media listening, why is it relevant to medical affairs, and how do you do it?
Yeah. Thank you again, Tom, for having us. It's a privilege to be on the podcast and the opportunity to kind of set up the background for this. So, I mean, let's face it, right? Online conversations about science, data, therapeutics, disease landscape, everything. It's happening all the time, whether we're paying attention to it or not. We see it peak, at least I work in the oncology space. So we see it peak around conferences, key data releases, major publications. And there's a lot of information to be gleaned there, which is what makes it important for medical affairs, right? Like we're paying attention to podium presentations, we're paying attention to what's happening in scientific exchange because we're getting insights and other valuable information from it. And this online exchange, this online discourse that's happening is another source for us to gather this information and kind of contextualize it against those other sources. Because there's a lot of information that we can get from kind of an online public square in a sort or in a sense. The beauty of it being public, you would ask, how do you do it? I mean, I could pull out my phone right now and pull up X, LinkedIn, or any number of other social media platforms and kind of get information on some of the therapeutics. You do have to keep in mind if you're working for an organization or an institution that has limitations on these, it's probably going to be with engagement or even what you can do. But so you want to be careful with that. But as you mentioned, our sponsor or the sponsor for the show, Medical Watch is one of these tools that you can use. It's one I personally like to use because it's I found it to be easiest. So there's a lot of these platforms that you can use that either pull from Twitter or like every internet source available, even potentially Reddit threads. Some you can search by keywords and some are HCP specific. So, I mean, you have the internet, you could do the digging yourself, or you could use one of these tools that kind of aggregates things for you, depending on what's going to be most valuable for you and your role.
Awesome.
Yeah, just to kind of add to that, I think that everybody's got a platform out there that works. I think it's using multiple platforms is really valuable for an MSL because there's just so much out there. But really trying, I think we're going to try to talk a little bit more about how in the field we kind of use this. And I think when you're listening to these things, find your KOLs that are active and what platform they use. And I think that also helps you.
Yeah, I think some of the most successful MSLs out there that I'm following, that I know, that I'm having conversations with, are digital first. They're definitely taking that the digital part of their role very seriously and utilizing the digital tools and artificial intelligence tools that are available to them so that it can make them more efficient and better prepared with their KOLs and for their meetings. So this is awesome. So now you get the information, and then what do you do with it?
Well, I tell you what, Tom, that's a great question. And I think, you can really become bogged down by the sheer volume of information that's out there.
Mhm.
And I think that's where, you really have to be careful with what you're listening to and make sure that you categorize some of these insights that are happening. Because every influencer, every digital person that's out there, there's different degrees of education that they have and maybe how they analyze things. But as a field MSL, I think it's really important to see what in the people that in your territory are actually commenting about. And it's also important to see if people in your territory are even liking or retweeting some of the stuff from maybe some global MS or global KOLs, and really keep track of that because I think that's where there could be talking points that are in there that once you've seen that maybe somebody has liked or retweeted something that was maybe a Congress presentation or maybe even something of a comment on a guideline. It's real important to make sure that you've got that kind of in your back pocket because it is an opportunity for you to be able to discuss that with your KOL. Even if they're not a digital KOL, it's really how they're interacting with some of the larger influencers that are out there.
Mhm.
Right. I couldn't agree more, Kevin. Even thinking about so there's obviously we're talking about probably some of the most prolific people online, but the vast majority, myself included, are mostly consumers, right? Like I'm not creating a lot of content, but I'm consuming a lot of content. And you're right, social media gives you a very unique opportunity to see what's being consumed because it's a way to say like, hey, I share that thought or sentiment or other thing, and to take that into a meeting makes that meeting that much more effective rather than going in blind. You can say, hey, I saw you commented on this guideline or you shared this data. What made you do that? What made it impactful? And you can have so much better discussions in the field by having that level of preparedness and that level of awareness.
Mm.
And it's key, I think, for you to know who your customers are following
Hmm.
because you can go in and look and see who somebody is following. And I think that also gives you a talking point. They may agree or even disagree with their opinion. And I think that's an important part to really dive down and maybe get an insight that you can take back to your company and have maybe even a deeper discussion point internally on something like that.
Yep. So let's talk about, you mentioned DOLs, digital opinion leaders. Let's talk about these guys and gals. So how
Sure.
do they fit into this?
Yeah, so it's interesting, Tom, because you've had a few guests come on, and I've heard varying definitions of what this looks like. And my
Yeah.
theory for that is it's probably because, many of us are working in different therapeutic areas.
Hmm.
Someone who's a digital opinion leader or DOL for me in oncology, it may look very different for someone in, say, the cardiovascular or obesity space or some other area. So what I've found, particularly in oncology, you really kind of have like three elements that come together. One, you have someone who's an expert in the field in some way, right? Because they have to have some level of credibility, some reason for people to be listening to them for the information that they're providing. And two, you want the audience to primarily be HCPs. Those are the ones that we're trying to work with in terms of research and education and providing fair and balanced information to make sure that, they have everything they need when they're seeing patients, right? So you would expect someone to be credible, to be the one who's putting out the information. You would expect the HCP audience to be there. And then, of course, digital, they have to have an online presence in some way. Or not, I shouldn't say some way, in a very significant way, right? And the way I kind of think of this that makes it really easy is I think of it like a digital podium. Like we're paying attention to podium presenters and speakers because we know how important it is in the way that they deliver their message and that they're informed too on the data so that they're delivering it appropriately. And this is another podium in a sense. So it's important that they're well informed about the different therapeutic options that are available in a particular space in the landscape and everything, and that the data is really clear in a fair and balanced way.
Yeah, I think that opportunity for us to really make sure that the people that you're listening to are the ones that do have following. I think that's, I use the term influencer here a few different times, and I think that that is, what it really comes down to is, but at the same time, the credibility and how they've, what have they done in the past to deserve to be an influencer, I think is a key thing that has to be discerned before you really start to grab a hold of what maybe someone is saying. So be careful is probably the first thing I could say here is don't take everything that you hear from someone who's got the most likes as necessarily what is practice changing.
Well, I love that you brought up the term influencer too, because I feel like a DOL is different. Yes, they're influential in what they're doing, but I feel like influencers are, I don't want to say targeted to a more general audience, but they're appealing to a more general audience, right? And so that may be relevant for like our patient advocacy colleagues, because the audience is probably going to be mostly patients or something like that, right? But influencers, at least maybe I'm biased in the oncology space, but I would be kind of nervous if my oncologist was taking advice from an influencer, say like
Yep.
versus an oncologist DOL. So that's kind of how I think about it, and that may change as you go through the spectrum of some of the different disease states. But one of the things that I think about in terms of categorizing who is a DOL and then prioritizing them for engagements and other things. So like you said, you got to make sure you have the right folks, and then finding opportunities to work with and engage with them.
Yeah, it's such a good point because there's these quote unquote influencers that are out there. You really have to vet these folks out and see who's legit and who's someone that you want to align with, and who's someone you don't for whatever reason.
Mhm.
But so as we're talking about DOLs, so once you identify them or it becomes apparent who the key ones are, how do you work together with them?
That's a great question. I think it's unanswered, honestly, at this
Mm.
point. I think we're still kind of learning how to work with people. And I think as a field MSL, it's different than what you have for someone who's in your marketing department or someone who's in your patient advocacy department. I think you really need to first off is the vetting process has to be very important. And I think it is somebody if you're at a local level, you're out in the field, I think engaging with them and seeing, what is it that how our company can interact with them. Now, this may be above the field MSL role, but sometimes, maybe is there educational opportunities for them? Is there some sort of a sponsorship? That's starting to get into that influencer world there where, you don't want to necessarily just go for clicks. But I think one of the things that, you need to make sure that you understand what their purpose is, and I think that's how you start to work with them and bring to them information that really is relevant to, what they're thinking. And really, honestly, if they're somebody who has a tremendous amount of followers, you want to make sure that the information that they're putting out is correct
Hmm.
and it is something that is in line with maybe what you're trying to bring out also. So I think it again, we could probably go on an entire show here talking about this and make it very very detailed, but I think from the surface you do need to make sure that you understand what their purpose is, and that's asking questions.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Listening, figuring out what's going to add value for them, and sometimes it is making those connections to other parts of the company, right? Like that is adding value in itself. Is well, maybe they should speak with the patient advocacy group because they're active online and it's primarily towards a patient community or patient advocacy community. So making sure that you're ready to, just as Kevin said, listen, understand what's going to meet their needs, and then making sure that you do that to the best that you can.
Yeah, and Kevin, you reminded me, you said, we could do a whole episode just on DOLs. Like shameless plug, there are episodes on the MSL Talk podcast that we talk about DOLs. Matter of fact, I just did one recently with Paul Ward. Big shout out to
Yes.
Paul. Awesome, awesome dude. So check that episode out if you're interested, if you haven't heard it yet. Um, it definitely ties in with all this. And if you've listened to this next question, like if you've listened to other episodes that I've done with on social listening, this next question is a big one Because what I want to know from you guys is how then, knowing what we know and what you guys have already discussed, how then has social media listening evolved?
Yeah, I mean that's the big question, right? And not to those other episodes are fantastic. Highly recommend listening to them. Not to dis I'm going to over distill them in a sense, but it seems like the standard right now. And Kevin, Tom, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's that we're listening to what's going on, we're bringing back the insights, we're maybe using it for pre-call planning, and that's the extent of where we are probably as a whole across medical affairs, at least as far as what I could tell from listening to those other guests and talking to colleagues and other things. And I think there are opportunities here to go beyond that.
Hmm.
So one, in terms of taking in, what can we learn from DOLs? And one of the things that I think DOLs do very, very effectively is they take very complex information, distill it into something that's very easily communicated and disseminate it in bite-sized information. And they do that through a digital platform. Sounds probably very familiar to, a key skill of MSLs, right? Is taking that complex information, distilling it down and communicating it effectively. And I think sometimes when I'm going into an engagement with, sometimes I've got a 30, 40, 50 slide deck. And I'm like, maybe we could learn a thing or two in terms of our medical material preparation, right? Maybe we could use some of their teachings in terms of if they're using an infographic to teach a topic, maybe we can use something like that, right? So maybe it's partnering with them to figure out, hey, what's going to communicate our data most effectively? I mean, right now we're using slides. Is there a better way that we can do it? Another thing that I think about too is what can we do with this information? It's all in the public forum. We can collect it either manually or through some kind of platform. And Kevin kind of brought this up earlier where he was talking about the frequency of things. I think the frequency of when you're hearing things can tell you quite a bit, especially for new data, right? So you think about a conference like ASCO, if you can track, what's happening with different therapeutics, what's happening with different studies, and you look at it and you see a big spike over a 6 month period, like, hey, wow, something, data was released and now people are talking about it. That probably tells you that that data is impactful.
Mm.
Conversely, you have a big data release and you're not hearing any chatter. What does that say about your data too? And then beyond that, you can run sentiment analysis. Tom, you mentioned AI earlier, right? Like we have these large language models. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. Is it okay? Yeah. I mean, at least right now, and it's only going to get better. So you could also do like look at, okay, there were a lot of posts. Let's analyze the sentiment on them. Let's see kind of what's happening here in the background. And these are just a few ways that you can start taking, baseline level of, okay, you've gone through the process of listening, you're gathering these insights, you're using it for pre-call planning. Here are some of the things that you can start to layer on because you're already doing the work. And now this is just a little bit more that you can get even more out of.
Mm.
And to add to that, shameless plug for MedWatch here, but I think, there is a lot of information that comes out at a conference. And I think really taking that information and using a company or using a platform that takes a little bit of the work out for the MSL, because when you're at a conference, you're busy. And, spending time online is very difficult. And I think being able to have a platform that is able to condense some of this down and bring that sentiment. I echo what Connor said here. There's two sides of this coin. It's great to have a lot of chatter, but what is the sentiment behind that chatter? And if there's no chatter, why is there none? And I think those are where some of these tools that are out there that are available can be very valuable because they can analyze that very quickly. And the digital world moves extraordinarily fast. This isn't this isn't your grandfather's MSL team, right? I mean, you need to be able to move quickly, and sometimes the sentiment can change from hour to hour. And I think using a program and whatever it is, it definitely is a tool that needs to be probably in your toolbox here.
Yeah, if I may add one small thing to your point exactly, like sometimes you need a tool to just make it faster. I think one of the biggest concerns if you're starting some social media listening is like, all right, you're going to spend all this money to go to this conference and you're going to be glued to your phone or laptop the entire time. That's not ideal, right? You need to do it quickly and efficiently. But remember, you're there for the conference, for the material, for the meetings, for everything else. So this is just a small piece of that.
So this all sounds like as I'm listening, it sounds awesome. It sounds important. It sounds like why wouldn't MSLs be doing all this? But then there's always the but. Like, is legal cool with this? Like, is there what are the words of caution and what do you need to tell MSLs to be careful of?
Boy, this is a topic that I think here's the next half hour, folks.
Part two.
Um, or two. But I think, one of the things that you absolutely need to do is make sure that your legal team and your medical affairs legal is absolutely on board with how to handle this.
Mhm.
And I think there needs to be policies in place in order to kind of give you some guidelines and some guardrails so that things don't go off track. But I think some of the most important parts of it, and this is just kind of summarizing it, is making sure that when you interact or when you basically don't interact. I mean, don't retweet, don't like. I mean, I think company policies will state that you don't want to show this bias that's out there, and because you want to be somebody who is unbiased. And I think also, making sure that if you are interacting with them, making it non-promotional is absolutely critical. And making sure that you just, disclose what your purpose with them is with the DOL, but also making sure that it fits within your company guidelines. Every company is different. Nobody is going to be, have the right or the wrong way, but making sure that you do it ethically and keeping it within these regulatory guidelines is so key. And I think just being a good MSL and following what you normally would as an MSL is critical here because honestly, you can follow somebody, but reposting something they say could absolutely be viewed wrong by somebody.
Yeah, if you're at a big enough company, there's a policy on this. You're going to want to look it up. It's almost certainly there. And if I may add, it's we talked a little bit about DOLs. You probably want to lock down that definition pretty early. It's a lot easier talking to legal when you're like, I'm talking about HCPs with an HCP audience. That jives because that's, our podium presenters and our
Mhm.
scientific
Mhm.
expert and everything else. And if you start, talking about influencers and other things, it's going to get complicated really fast. So everything Kevin said, like trust your instincts, follow your ethics, follow your policies, but also like be prepared to plan early.
Yep. So let's talk about that. You said plan early. Let's talk about like best practices, pitfalls, things that we probably need to mention to the audience to make sure that if you're kind of new to this or if you're still kind of learning about it, what would be the rules of the road and best practices?
Yeah, so vetting DOLs is something Kevin mentioned. That's really important because you want to make sure that you have a list that you're very comfortable with. Because especially if you're saying, well, we should prioritize these folks for engagement, right? What are they appropriate to engage with? You want to make
Mm.
sure that you're not sending any, of your fellow teammates out to meet someone who gets their notoriety from, criticizing pharma or making harsh comments, and you could get them in really hot water. So that's one of the big things. The other thing, stepping back a little bit and thinking more big picture, is, and Tom, you had said this, digital first, right? Like these are a lot of cool tools. We can do a lot with them. AI is probably going to be one of the most transformative things of this decade, right? But it's not everything, right? What the foundation, what the core of this all is good patient-centric science. That's what was ultimately going to inform medical practice. That's going to be what's most helpful. And these digital tools are something that can help us understand it better, help us disseminate it better, help us make sure that, our plans with it, our medical strategies with it are better. But you need that at its core. If you're all in on digital, like we can't run a trial right now by going to ChatGPT and saying, run a 350 patient trial with this drug and give me the results. We don't trust that data, right? You need to have the strong science as a foundation, and then use these digital tools as supplements to make sure that you're executing your medical strategy.
Connor nailed it. I mean, honestly, be prepared. I think when you're doing these assessments, also sometimes you need to think a little bit outside the box of just your role and make sure that you've got other people both on your commercial and your medical side somewhat involved also because they may be interacting with them also. So I think, making sure that you have your internal or your matrix, so to speak, of your company also in mind because these influencers have no boundaries. There is no territory for them. Everybody can read their posts. So making sure that everybody that needs to be engaged is engaged before you go out and make some of these interactions.
Yeah, I only see this becoming more important and growing because
Oh,
so
yeah.
I'm gonna explain like I'm gonna out myself and kind of share like my age. I started as a rep a million years ago when there was no internet, right? So the old school physicians that were practicing back then, they're all have either moved on or are about to move on. So now as time has it, you're going to get these younger, more seasoned, tech savvy MDs that are coming into existence that some of them may be experts in the digital world or they may want to adopt the digital world, the social media world um, as a key part of their practice. It may just be something and we're seeing it. That's what this is. And it's become so important that you have to stay on top of it. So, what other parting words do you have for MSLs that are out there that are like, I keep hearing about this, I know it's important, but I haven't fully maybe embraced it, or I need to do more. Like, what else can you add to what you guys? I mean, you guys are awesome, but I'm just curious as to what other final piece of advice you can give to folks.
Well, I guess the final piece here that I would probably say is, this is the future. The future is here now, and AI and all this digital is how people are communicating. And so, if you haven't gotten on this train yet, you're going to be left at the station, and
Mm,
you're not getting on. So I think one of the things that you just need to be aware of what's out there and discuss this with your leadership about how your company is handling AI and how they're handling this digital part because it is an important part and it goes very quickly. And so it needs to be, I think you need to be able to be flexible and evolve.
mhm.
And that's one thing, got to remember patients are also looking at this. And so they're learning as you go. So I think learning this entire piece is such an important part because at the end user, which is the patient, is actually they're reading this. I mean, they can sign up for X just as easy as I can. So I think this is not the future is here today. And so we need to be very aware of how to handle this.
Yep.
Yeah, you can't really say like I don't use AI. It's really I don't use AI yet
Mm,
because I mean if you do a Google search now, like you're using AI.
right.
Mhm.
So you really I would say yes, this is coming. You have to be as ready for it as you can. I mean that's part of being an MSL, right? Is adapting and being ready for change. I think you can do this in baby steps still. Like just try it. Like use ChatGPT once. Try it for something. I mean, obviously be careful about what proprietary information goes into a public, AI model, but just give it a shot and little by little you can learn and that learning will snowball. So it's here. It's going to keep growing. If you're not using it, you're just not using it yet.
Well, listen, I am really, let's say, I know that the people that listen to this podcast are on the cutting edge. They all want to do better. They're all motivated. They're growth oriented. Um, or they're going to break into this MSL role and they're going to want to do this. So, guys, I can't thank you enough. I think this is incredibly valuable information. I encourage everybody to share this with friends because I really think that this is going to be super, super important as we move forward into the rest of this year. And who knows what's going to happen in 2026? That's a whole nother
Absolutely.
episode. Is like we talked about the evolution, like what's the future? What could happen? Because there's things are moving so fast. So guys, thank you, Connor, Kevin. Thank you guys both for joining. You guys are amazing. I really appreciate you both.
All
Thank you.
right. Thank you so much, Tom.
Yeah, man. Guys, as always, appreciate you being here. Share this with others. Thank you for your support of the show, and we'll see you next time.